Hello, namaste, and welcome to the Chris Abay podcast show. I'm your host, Chris Abay, corporate dropout, yoga entrepreneur, and father of three. My reason for doing this show is to connect with and learn from shining characters in our community who have forged a way to take their passion and make it happen. You may recognize some of them from their businesses in the area. You may even recognize some of them from practicing yoga inside our studio. The yogis call it dharma. Most of us call it destiny. But whatever you call it, it takes inner strength to be true to who and what you really are.
I had gone almost through a reality tunnel to a different sort of, a garden of paradise, even though it was, and once I'd gone through that switch, I knew there was no going back.
My guest this week is Jamie Clarke. He's an inspirational man who was born in London and found his way all the way over to sunny California, developed an amazing corporate career, and then the death of his mother was a pivoting point in his life, which came crashing down around him and created a new reality. How he changed his life to take his passion and make it happen is this week's story. Welcome to Jamie Clarke.
Hey Jamie, it's great to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, Chris. Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here.
So, your childhood dreams, let's start with those. Tell us about those.
I found it very difficult to sit still. So I was hyperactive as a kid, and my family circumstances, my parents divorced when I was 4. I had a stepfather and a stepmother, 4 parents growing up from the age of 4 or 5. So there was a lot of complexities in that dynamic. And I was an anxious kid, good at sports, and couldn't sit still. And my mom wanted me to be this sort of, she wanted to proudly present her son as this doing all the right things. And I found exams and schooling very challenging. I got away with a lot of it because I came second in the United Kingdom for cross-country running at 13 and went on to run for Great Britain until I was 17. Wow. So I got out of a lot of schooling. That's the point. I had a great coach, and I went to at my secondary school in St. Albans, and I struggled through my exams. I got my exams. I got my O and A levels, but because of my background in athletics, yes. About the half-mile distances, I got some invitation to go to the States to study on a track scholarship.
Wow, get in, all right. And what happened there? So
I just had the same, annoyingly for my mom, who'd become, she'd become one of these parents who was so enthralled in my running career. I started to rebel, and by the time I was 17 or 18, I was just right on the end of really being enthusiastic about, early nights and training all day. So right. I wanted to go out and go to the pubs and go out with girls and go and partying. So it was. I remember I went to the States and I went to Stanford, and they offered me a full scholarship in USC as well. My times were very fast. I had you remember Sebastian Coe? I had times as fast as him. So I had fast times at that. Yeah, I had fast times, but I was also wanting to do other things. So I remember thinking, okay, I got to go over there, but can't have a full scholarship because I won't last a year. So I went to North Carolina. So California, University of California, I got a degree in economics, and then went to live in San Francisco and got a job in sales. I think it was sales, selling photocopiers or business machines or something like that as a first job out of college. And then my mother died of cancer in London. So I completely lost my mind for about 2 or 3 years. I went through a difficult, dark time dealing with that, and which had a big, really surprisingly, I wasn't prepared for it. It had a huge impact on me.
How did this all then start to transition for you?
It started to lead to me getting unmotivated. I was going through a deep, dark depression personally, even though I was trying to showcase myself while I was at work. And so I was living a lie a little bit, going to work and feeling sadness inside and at home. Nice. And I went down to the Gorilla Fitness, and it was just about 1999 or year 2000, and I took my first yoga class. And I was on antidepressants at the time, and while working doing management consulting. So I was just about holding it together professionally. And I remember going into that yoga class and think on medication, and I remember thinking, this is different. Something in this practice, breath and movement, and how I feel afterwards, it just cut through that haze and that sadness that I was feeling. And I felt such a profound moment of shift, like this medicine, whatever it is, this natural intrinsic ability for the body to heal just through meditation and conscious movement on the mat. I remember having a big smile and thinking, this is a game changer. And I remember I stopped taking, I'd only taken it for a few weeks, but it had made me feel worse. So I stopped taking the medication, and then from that point, my life started to shift towards more of a healing journey. And it was just a matter of time before I then started to reverse out of what I was doing as a profession. And I was being pulled towards this healing journey by a force that, I didn't feel like it was a conscious force. It was just, I just knew I had to go in that direction.
Some people are drawn into their own destiny. It's almost like as much conscious choice they might have going in one direction as their heart and their destiny is pulling them almost invisibly in a new direction. Is that something that you maybe identify with, Jamie?
Yeah, I absolutely I do. And there was a transitional point where I had core beliefs, conventional mindsets around job, career, future, family, etc.
Sure.
And yet there was a great freedom, groundedness, calmness, and clarity in pulling me away from all of that towards an abyss I didn't know where the destination was going. It was going into the horizon somewhere, but it just felt on every cell of my body, it felt right. And it felt authentic, and it felt, then the questions of how am I going to earn money, and do what I am falling in love with, how am I going to go from earning a lot? I was earning a good amount of money as a director of development for the accounts.
It's a pressure job, right? They pay people high bucks to do that kind of work because it's not easy.
Yes, I was presenting to CEOs and CFOs, and those people have, they'll give you a New York minute to make a difference. And so I was presenting towards them, and it was a responsible job, a stressful job, a job that I could do in terms of what I'd been trained for at school, I suppose. However, it wasn't where my heart was. I knew that a lifetime of being in that in that sort of, in that sort of machine was going to, the cliche is, it was killing my soul. So the artist, the artist, and the I suppose also the wounded child in me was yearning for something which was healing and authentic.
Wow, challenging. To get to that level, it sounds, and to that income as well, and it sounds like you were right at the threshold. You're about to pivot through your own experience with some bereavement and also into a new experience with yoga and the breathing, moving, healing experience for yourself that took you away from the convention and away from the antidepressants. Now you're on a precipice where you can either step back to the security of all the stuff you no longer believe in, or you can close your eyes and step off the edge and trust your destiny. Which did you choose, and where did it lead you?
Well, once I had felt that level of peace, clarity, an alternative state. So remember, we exist in these states, and gradually these states of, let's say, busyness, drive, obsession about achieving a certain fantasy, goal, lifestyle, picture in our minds, they deepen and become more into a neurosis and a psychosis. And once I'd gone into yoga, I literally had my state collapsed on me, and I had felt feelings, and I had gone almost through a reality tunnel to a different sort of, a garden of paradise, even though it was. And once I'd gone through that switch, I knew there was no going back. I knew that there was no returning to the state that had been toxic for me in the first place. And it's if you think about my bereavement, when I say this, the death of my mother was in part a serious portal in towards this alternative place of peace, because had she not passed away, there would not have been that sort of anxiety and intensity that under the strain of loss and grief had collapsed all my life, my worldview. Yeah. And then had created something else. I'd sort of gone through that, what they call, that where reality collapses, the depression collapses, the darkness collapses in on itself, and you go through into a state of renewed possibility. A lot of gurus and spiritual Illuminati talk about this moment where things collapse, and then what's beyond that is a sort of freedom from what was before. So once I had gone through that moment, I knew there was no coming back.
And
I had to go on.
Jamie, where did it, because I know that your story comes out to what's now internationally recognized as the yoga people, but my listeners possibly at this stage don't quite know what that means. So if you could share with us your journey from that pivot into where you're now earning money doing what you love, this healing process, rather than earning money doing what you had structurally learned to do in a corporate environment. The transition, what did you create? What is the yoga people?
Well, it was the basic, like I said, the platform of the transformation was the grief. And I'd gone through that eye of the needle, in which then I'd come out to a different reality. I then just trusted that what I was feeling, as opposed to what I was fantasizing or thinking, was the right path. So I went in doing more and more yoga for myself. I then started to go into to go to India, go to Mysore. I got very much into Mysore practice in Mysore, India. I met, as you know, it talk about synchronicity. As I was leaving San Francisco, having lived there for 7 years, I met my first true guru teacher, Larry Schultz, who introduced me to, as I was leaving, going to London. I went to London. I felt terrible depression as I arrived back. All my conditioning crashed in on me again. And so I then went to India, to Mysore. And I met Larry as I was leaving San Francisco to go to London and on to Mysore. And he said, dude, I'll see you. And I thought, you know what? There's a wizard, and I'm going to come back and see him. So I went to India. I went to Lino Miele, who's a very auspicious Ashtanga teacher. I went to Mysore with him, actually. He introduced me to Patabi Joyce, and I went to. I went there, and I came, and I thought, I've got to go back and see that dude in San Francisco. So this all happened within 2000, 2001. And after 2001, I went back and met and walked in to see Larry. And that's how my transition...
Went back to San Francisco to see Larry, you mean?
I went back to San Francisco to see Larry. And by then I was a total yogi. My hair was long. You know, I'd hung up my suits. I remember walking out of the management consultant's office on my last day, and they said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to do any more of this. And they say, but your age, you're not going to find another career. You're very difficult to get back to the level that you're leaving. I'm not, we'll give you 6 months to think this through. I got all of that. But I was like, I took off my tie and I thought, you know what? I literally took off my tie. I walked out in Montgomery Street, San Francisco. I walked out of my office and I kind of threw it in the air. And I thought, that's it. I'm never doing this job again. And from that moment on, I went into a world of yoga. I went to India, which was fascinating. But when I really started to think, wow, this is a magical world, was when Larry brought me into It's Yoga. Because there was a dude who had made his fantasy, his reality, or his joy of yoga into his reality with It's Yoga on Folsom Street. And 148 Folsom Street. And I went and lived with Larry for months and months. And then I started to do his teacher trainings with him. And he took me under his wing. And that's when I met Dulce. After a few years later, I traveled back and forth to India. I go to India, and then I come back and live with Larry. I go to India. There was always a place I'd fly into San Francisco. He's like, dude, there's a bed for you. Just I'll leave the key out. And I would come back. And so I would then stay for like 6 months in It's Yoga, and then I go back to India. And then in India, I decided to go. I had a bit of money left for me from my mother's death, and I bought some property in London. And on one of the trips going back to Larry in 2008, I met Dulce.
Just for the listeners, to just share us very quickly, Larry Schultz, I mean, he is an icon in the Ashtanga yoga world, but not necessarily all my listeners know the power of his influence on the practice through yourself and other teachers. Maybe you could just touch on Larry for a second before we carry on with your story, just so that people, because you referred to him there are times now, and I think it's fair that people get to know him a little, just a little.
Well, Larry is if you look actually the pioneer of power yoga, it cites Larry Yoga. He was a student of Patabi Joyce. He then took the primary, second, and third series, and he mixed the poses into sequencing, which was more accessible for people that couldn't do the archetypal, formulaic sequences of Patabi Ashtanga. And he created the rocket sequence, which was very dynamic, very uplifting, very user friendly. I mean, many qualities about it. And he became known as the bad man of Ashtanga yoga because he broke protocol and created his own sequencing. Well, you didn't do that, but he did, and he created power yoga, which was then adopted in the West, in the United States, and led into sort of creative vinyasa yoga. So he's very much a pioneer of vinyasa yoga, away from the traditional set sequences of Ashtanga.
It's very interesting hearing you talk about Larry Schultz. You talk about him, Jamie, in the present tense. So in your soul, in your spirit, I'm sensing that this man is alive. But that's not the truth, is it?
Well, he died in 2011. Or he left his body, as they say, in 2011. However, Larry's energy, inspiration, very much lives through me. I've had some wonderful teachers. I've had some wonderful teachers, Larry, Paul and Susie Grilly, and fantastic psychology teachers now, which I've moved into. So he's very much alive in me and in the yoga people. Now, the yoga people is what I created with Dulce.
Got to touch very briefly. You've mentioned Paul Grilly, another absolute legend. I mean, and he's still breathing, right? But he is, just so that the listeners, Larry Schultz, the rocket sequence. This is where I met Jamie in Glastonbury, and that was an incredible training process. The toughest yoga I've ever done in my life. And you say it's user friendly. And Paul Grilly, the godfather of the yin practice, and all of his knowledge, and even his students. Some of the other teachers I've had, including Duncan Pico, were students of Paul Grilly, and Paul Grilly he's the yin god, right? So for anyone who's listening who's not aware, if you've ever heard of yin yoga, it pretty much exists because of Paul Grilly's teaching. So please, Jamie, please continue.
Okay, a little bit about yin yoga is Paul. I met Paul, or actually, I bought Paul's book as I was
Which book?
leaving. It's titled just very simply Yin Yoga, and he's written the principles of Yin Yoga more recently. And but the very first early small green book I bought, and I saw this bald guy on the back photograph, and I just connected, and I thought, this practice. Also, I want to say that I did, when I first started doing vinyasa yoga, before even I met Larry, I met a guy called Clayton Horton, who lived very close to me. He's an Ashtanga, well-known Ashtanga teacher. He introduced me to the Mysore practice. And in my first gym in Gorilla Fitness on Chestnut Street, I met a teacher called Ivy, and she mixed, like how Dulce puts the mandala practices, she mixed 2 or 3 yin yoga poses, then a vinyasa practice, then 2 or 3 yin yoga poses at the end. And I remember I thought the yin practice to me really awakened something, this sort of deep, still stretching, stressing of the tissue process. And I thought, this type of practice I'm very interested in, as well as the movement practice. So I thought, at some point, I'm going to go and train with this dude. And when Larry died, it's interesting, actually. I waited till Larry died before I switched to go and see Paul. And I literally switched from teaching vinyasa when Larry died. And then I went to Thailand with Dulce to a training in 2011. That's where actually I met Duncan Peake. I met there.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. I met Duncan in 2011. And from there, I would go a couple of times a year to see Paul and Susie, first in Thailand and then always in Land of Medicine Buddha, in where they do their trainings now.
And you've mentioned Dulce a few times, just so that the listeners know, Dulce is the other half of the yoga people, right? So together you created something I would call uniquely special in the world because of the number of people that you've trained in the Ashtanga.
Well, we've trained over 2,000. We've trained over 2,000 teachers more now. Since we set up our yoga school. Yeah, I met Dulce with Larry. I sat there with Larry, and this cute young Mexican yogini was sitting in front of us. And I remember I was actually Larry's sitting on the couch. I was sitting right behind his right shoulder, and Larry started asking us some questions. And then he just sort of gestured at us both. He said, "You two." He was a wizard. Yes.
Wow.
He was a wizard. He could see things. He just said, "You two." And from then I went with Dulce. I dropped her off to 8th Street, and we got together, and the yoga people. Then we went to India together. Fell in love, went to India together, came to London, and we created the Yoga People right at the end of 2008. In 2009, we put together our website at the beginning of 2009, the Yoga People.
What is Yoga People? What is that?
We wanted something in the vein of what Larry also taught, which was very inclusive, community-based, family, creative, non-dogmatic. Bring me whoever you are. If you're wounded, if you're sick, if you're unwell, whoever you are, you're always welcome with us. And but in doing so, committing to a serious process of practicing and healing. And we created a yoga school where we taught Larry's 200 hours. Larry had its yogas around the world. I said to Larry, "Look, I want to create a yoga school with Dulce, but I want to call it the Yoga People. Do I have your blessing?" "Dude, you get to do whatever you want," is what Larry used to say. And so he said, "You can do whatever you want." So he guided us. We started our 200-hour training, and we tweaked it to make it very much our own process. We brought in the chakras from pretty much the beginning. And we started to we started to create a yoga school that just took off. We had a small garden flat in Southfields, and we were doing classes, and there were people lining up coming out the door. We had 22 people in there at one point, and there was 3 people practicing in the kitchen. And people would literally fall out of handstands and fall onto the cooker. They were rammed in, shoulder to shoulder.
Wow.
And it just took off. It was a magical time. I did an extension. We created this yoga space. We pissed off the neighbors far and wide. Eventually, they forced us to shut because we couldn't have they were complaining that strange people with, bombing,
right?
Yeah, bicycles showing up and mats, and they were like, it was just not something they were comfortable with, and we were pretty quiet, but we were having so much fun. I mean, it reminded me of Larry's studio in San Francisco in a smaller way. We had so much fun there. We created this great school, which has taken off since then.
So you've got Larry Schultz in your heart, strong Ashtanga practice, the Rocket Man. You've got Paul Grilly in your heart. He's the gentle, soft yin. For those who don't know, I did my 100 hours training with Jamie in India. That was an incredible yin teacher training experience. Highly recommend it to anybody thinking about it. Don't even think, just do it. You've got all of this. You meet Dulce, you create yoga people, you're teaching individuals from your cooker at home in Southfields, and then you elevate that when you need to then start teaching now nearly 2,000 teachers who are teaching your yoga around the world, right? From personal experience, I know that you are the real deal. I think those listening are starting to get a flavor for that. So what I'd love you to do is to give some of our listeners a route to you. How do they find yourself and Dulce? How do they tap into what you do?
Well, we can be found. We can be found online. TheYogaPeople.com is our website, is our founding website. We have all our online products, our typ.guru, which can be accessed through TheYogaPeople.com. And we are in the process of developing our products to do just what we've been talking about. We're in this sort of holistic approach, and we can be found online and through our community in London. Expect to have fun, but expect to do the real work.
The golden question that I would like to ask you to wrap all of this up is, would you come back and do it again? Would you speak to us again?
Absolutely. It was a great pleasure, and I would love to come back and share some more. So, if you would invite me, I'd be there like a shot.
Awesome.
Thanks, Chris. And I will see and speak to you very soon. Thanks for inviting me.
There you have it, the story of one of the legends in my life, Jamie Clarke, half of the Yoga People, trainer, entrepreneur, psychologist, and inspirational speaker.